I have an education. One is that compared to the modern politics, the society is kind of changed collectively. We have been so many different players. So it is very hard to like going over the family, whatever. They control the order of the playing part, members of the society. So how we can control all the different opinion leaders and the different sectors come together and co-work with the government. So my question is, it's like 40 or 50 years ago, the society was so simple, and they don't have any ideas, and they don't know about the world is kind of changing, and they don't know the technology and the money. So the government had a sole power to do all the things for the private sector or the officers who would like to participate in that kind of process. That's my question. And it's connected to my first question. Is right now the leadership. 40 or 50 years ago, it is connected to like competitions. The leader is a leader. So whatever he says, it's kind of word from like Bible. But right now the leader is kind of one of the leaders. That means we don't have to follow his leadership because his reign is only 5 years. 5 years later, we don't know who is coming next. So that's kind of the differences. The people and present party. So you have to give us the kind of ideas, answers, how we can solve the kind of problem.
So thank you for giving me such a very difficult question. So I would make a few clarifications. One, some projects some projects can be the profitability is observable at very early stage. So you can take a project and in some areas you can see early on that this would be commercially viable, and for that you don't need the government role, because the private sector would be able to get the short and medium term capital. Let's say a project that from the start to finish maybe a 7-year gestation period. These projects are to a great extent easier to recognize, and the private sector would have expertise. But where the benefits and costs to society and the learning process is very long term, where you won't have initial success in identifying what's the potential of the project, what's the potential of a new idea. These areas would need more government-led direction and more long-term financing that might not be privately available. So one important distinction is to identify the long-term priorities where there are very high startup and very long learning curves, and those become more or less publicly facilitated through government roles, and the ones where you're improving, let's say, the performance of a screen or an iPhone, where you have a technology that can be turned into a product and can be the learning process and the cost of the startup is much lower. And that you should really lead to the private sector. So that's one concept that I would leave with you. I have a few others, but I guess. So another important thing to consider is that with information technology or creative technologies, the government doesn't know what the next thing would be. In fact, nobody knows. So the real task or challenge is to create what some people call a strategic ecology. That is to create the environment where different actors and different capabilities and different geographic confluence of factors such as transportation, such as cultural amenities, such as affordable living facilities. These things create these creative clusters. And so one of the things that I do with some of my students is we design the physical environment to create these so-called creative clusters in various parts of cities around the world. And so basically it's the facilitating of the existence of strategic ecologies. That is something that the government can do, and then they have to allow the individual players to interact, and that's where the creativity comes from. So sometimes the most important ingredient is very intangible, such as a tolerance for diversity. So in a part of the city where different types of people can walk and be seen, and different ideas can be expressed, even those contrary to government positions, that environment of diversity can be, in some sense, the most important stimulus for innovation to take place. Shall we take another call?
Yes. Okay, thank you very much.
네, 고맙습니다. 또 질문 있으십니까?
어제 개동에서 많이 만났습니다. 창조경제에서 전주를 만난 게 아니고 어제 창조경제로 가고 같은 개발대학원도 가서 두 개를 다 가봤는데 한국뿐만 아니라 해외에서 온 개발유산급 사람들이 한국에 많이 와 있으니까 이 사람들의 아이디어까지도 같이 아울러서 발전시키는 게 좋겠다. 그런 말씀입니다.
My name is Sanko. I'm the CEO at 18 Ventures, which is a startup company. I think there was two keywords. One, in my opinion,
yes.
One was coordination, and the second one was diversity. That I think coordinating all different parties and all different players. And promoting diversity is two very different two things, and each of them needs very different leadership. What do you think about it?
Yes, so diversity has many definitions. For example, diversity could mean people with different ways of thinking, different education backgrounds. So if you look at some of the original software innovations, they are not necessarily made by people who have a degree in computation or computers. They're made sometimes by people who have a linguistic degree or other disciplines completely, that they see a problem differently. So I think when you look at companies that are focused on creativity, they also try to have diversity. They don't just have engineers. And this is, I think, one of the big problems with Japanese companies, is that they are almost completely dominated by engineers, and they come up with solutions that don't communicate that easily to the market. So there are a lot of fantastic Japanese products that are completely unknown. And in fact, my wife spends a lot of time on the internet discovering Japanese products that nobody knows about, because the marketing part of it is missing. The skills in marketing, and sometimes these are actually very artisanal products that only a few exist, and then they're gone. So diversity is absolutely critical, but diversity can also mean religious diversity, it could mean ethnic diversity. Those studies of the so-called creative clusters in the U.S. Always put a very high premium on diversity. And when we look at countries where there has been almost no innovation, like Pakistan, we also see that toleration is not there. Tolerance of different ethnic groups. Even Pakistanis don't tolerate other Pakistanis who have different beliefs. In those environments, you're certainly not going to get a creative outcome. So that's a place where civil society plays a very large role. And civic institutions play a very large role, that these institutions support diversity, encourage people to express themselves, encourage different ideas and different lifestyles to flourish. It's not a coincidence, according to people like Richard Florida, that those places where the diversity of lifestyles has flourished are also the same places where there's a diversity, where there are a high number of patents, where there's a lot of engineering, or let's say, there's a correlation between, a very strong correlation. So yes, getting the creative concept, the creative economy going definitely requires a broad acceptance of diversity. So coordination is sometimes viewed as a top-down thing. I need to just make one comment in regard to this small program, is that there's a very important part of understanding Park Chung-hee's achievements is to understand that the coordination that he facilitated was not only top-down, it integrated and met the needs of people at all levels of society, including the rural sector, including the landless peasant agricultural sector. He had ways of bringing all of these groups in.
걸로 할게요. 오늘 저희가 말씀 주신 것 중에 말씀 잘 들었고요. 오늘 그 키워드 중에 이런 게 있는데 연결, 중간 단계, 그 다음에 신뢰, 그 다음에 아까 메커니즘 이런 단어들이 지금 오늘 교수님이 말씀 주신 것 중에 굉장히 중요한 말로 와닿은 것 같아요. 근데 어제 혁신센터 다녀오셨다고 그랬는데 제가 한국의 혁신센터는 기업이 주도하고 있다고 제가 알고 있거든요. 그래서 다녀오신 그런 연결과 중간 단계, 신뢰, 메커니즘을 가지고 창조 혁신센터라는 것이 앞으로의 뭐라 그럴까 가능성, 그 다음에 결과론적인 어떤 팩타 이런 것들이 괜찮은지 이런 걸 한번 여쭙고 싶습니다.
Well, this is a very good question. I would really have to spend more time studying these centers and visiting the centers. I couldn't say from such a short visit what I think are the issues that might need to be addressed. I think that one issue is the time horizon of business people, and the question always arises in the U.S. is whether the business community is willing, especially the venture community, the investor community is willing to tackle society's biggest problems. One of which you mentioned, the aging problem and the lack of children. But many of society's biggest problems take long learning processes to deal with, and probably the business will have very little toleration for those long processes. So that's one question, and the other question is, you probably heard the debates in the U.S. about disruptive technologies. So the idea here is that many of the most important innovations occur in a niche where a product that initially has a very limited market over time acquires can be a game-changing technology and acquires a large influence over previous technologies and may even overcome some of these technologies. Now this is a problem in that ideally the environment that I would care to see is one in which small companies that occupy a niche in the market can grow to become big-sized companies. the risk of them being taken over and acquired disrupts their growth process. And quite often when a niche company is acquired by a large company, the large company really doesn't understand this product and doesn't understand the implications and may not be enthusiastic about them because they may challenge existing technologies. So we have to be aware that creativity can be disruptive. And in an environment where only the incumbents control the destiny of the future companies, then the disruptive technologies will not mature, and society will not gain the benefits of these technologies. So this is something I would caution you to be very concerned about.
제가 그 말씀을 잘 들었습니다. 근데 이제 박정희 그 리더십과 관련해서는 그 당시는 상당히 단순하고 또 리더십이 잘 먹혀 들어가서 그 어떤 조정을 하고 또 거기에 다 수능을 해서 서로 지금 신뢰관계가 잘 형성되고 그랬는데 지금 그 갈등 비용이 너무 많아서 아까 우리 고영길 대표님 사과를 얘기를 하셨는데 그 서로 이해관계가 첨예하다 보면 또 자기 주장이 강하고 그래서 그 비용만 해도 상당히 크다. 그래서 사회적 경쟁력을 나갈 수 있는 것을 상당히 저하를 가져오는데 이제 과거의 박정희 대통령 시대의 그 리더십과 지금의 리더십에 비교했을 때 어떻게 이것을 극복할 수 있을지 그것을 좀 말씀해 주시면 고맙습니다.
Well, my view of the Park-Chung-hee administration is somewhat different from yours. In the first few years, Park-Chung-hee faced enormous obstacles, and many of his ministers were being significantly challenged. In fact, the first thing he did when he acquired power, he put the leaders of tables into prison and wouldn't let them go until they agreed that they would follow the orders. Until they agreed to be in accord with the government modernization program. During the first few years, the Park-Chung-hee administration wanted to aggressively liberalize the economy, change the exchange rate system, make a lot of reforms in accord with IMF standards in the management of the central bank and the finance ministry. All of these, he faced enormous opposition from vested interests. So I don't think that it is true that society was easier to coordinate at the time. In fact, he had to often put people in jail. So it's actually probably easier today to coordinate in many regards because the opposition is more diversified, and you don't have just a few powerful companies that control everything. So I think the notion that things were simple in the 1960s is certainly, it's not my concept. At that time there was strong communist movement, there was a very strong leftist insurgencies in Korea and around the area. It was a much more dangerous time. Now that may have helped in the coordination process, that people saw tremendous risks. And they understood that if they didn't coordinate, that they could easily be conquered or destroyed by North Korea or by hostile countries in the area. So that factor certainly is somewhat different than today. I think that the coordination problem is a question of letting the self-organizing activities of society solve a lot of the problems. And as I said, it's only the really big problems with long that that take a long time to learn about and to manage. This is really the government is absolutely necessary. But the private sector and the civil society sector have so much capabilities, and they just need mechanisms to coordinate. They have the capabilities, they just don't have the mechanisms. What are these mechanisms? Well, in the U.S., the strongest mechanism is the stock market and the financial markets. There's a financial market diversity and competitiveness in financial market instruments. There are all kinds of ways that companies have of financing the future growth prospects. So the biotechnologies use different methods. They have obviously longer germination periods. Software using IPOs, using equity ownership. Some industries using bonds. Others using angel investors who take a large share in the equity of the project. So the diversity of the financial markets has an important role in the coordination. And the reason why one might want to improve financial market competition is that then if mistakes are made, it's not the government that has to pay, it's not the public that has to pay, it's the private investors who would have been the beneficiaries that need to pay. So over the course, obviously, since the 1990s and since the financial crisis of 97, 98, the financial service sector in Korea has certainly grown to an enormous degree more competitive and more diverse. But that's really, when we talk about coordination, market coordination can play a very, very large role in this if the right market mechanisms are in place.
네, 시간 관계상 여기에서 마치도록 하고요. 오늘 스페셜 세션에 참석해 주신 여러분 대단히 고맙습니다. 그러면 조찬 여유롭게 즐기시기 바라고 이것으로 오늘 스페셜 세션 모두 마치도록 하겠습니다. 고맙습니다.